How do psychedelics work? That's what we'll be answering in this episode. I've really intended this episode to be for those people who have tried a psychedelic once or twice, experienced something crazy, had no idea what happened, it blindsided you, and maybe now you're scared of trying it again, or maybe now you're researching to find out, like, what happened to me? How do I explain what happened? So if you care about explaining what happened, then this is the episode for you. I'm going to explain all of the mechanics and metaphysics and the epistemology of psychedelics, which I've been studying for several years now in a lot of depth. And my background in this, really, it started with just existential and metaphysical contemplation, epistemic contemplation, which I've been doing for decades, basically since my teens, without ever doing any psychedelics. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, I got into psychedelics and started experimenting with them. And because I was already into non-duality and spirituality and philosophy and science and studying the foundations of science, like it really got me interested in how do I square what I'm experiencing in my psychedelic trips with mainstream science and our ordinary understanding of reality. Because it's so odd and so weird and so jarring, some of the stuff that you can experience in psychedelic trips. And I don't really see anybody explaining it anywhere. I had to figure it out for myself. I don't see anybody explaining it, how it actually works. So that's what you're going to get here. So let's get into that. Just for reference, if you're curious, I've done about 80 trips at this point, various kinds of psychedelics. I've done mushrooms, I've done LSD, I've done 2CB, I've done 5-MeO-DMT, I've done DBT, I've done 4-ACO-DMT, and many others that most humans don't even know about. I've done psychedelics that there are no trip reports written about, completely new substances, which I'll be talking about in the future. So stick with me for that. But so I have quite a diversity of experiences. And one of the biggest tricks with psychedelics, one of the biggest problems, is that people talk about psychedelics or try to understand psychedelics without having enough direct experience with them, and also not having enough diversity in different substances, because they can be quite different, even though they're all basically taken to the same place in different ways. But it really helps to explore the entire field, the entire territory, to start to wrap your mind around what's really going on. And I would say it takes about 50 trips, at least 50 trips, to start to understand what psychedelics are really about. And that's one of the biggest problems that I see in the entire field of both science and in psychedelics, and also in the spiritual community, is that people just don't appreciate how deep this territory is, how broad it is, how much material there is here. And they say silly things like, oh yeah, I did some psychedelics back in high school a couple of times with my friends. I got it. I got the message. So, as Alan Watts used to say, once you hear the message, you hang up the phone. No. Your first few trips, that's not even a beginning yet. Those are like the first few words of the introduction. So humble yourself, really open your mind. And if you're serious about understanding what psychedelics are from a sort of a scientific perspective, which is where I'm coming at it from, then you got to be really willing to put your own balls on the chopping block and to really become a guinea pig and do this. Do you really want to understand? If you want to really understand, you ain't going to understand it by reading books or really even listening to me, although I'll help you here. This episode will be potentially life transforming for you, because it will show you how to work with psychedelics and the full power of psychedelics, which is little known to many people, even those who have tried it a few times, really, because you gotta really get deep in it. You got to get 50 trips deep into it to really start to understand what the hell is going on here. So, this is one of the most powerful tools that you will find for spiritual growth and for personal development, hands down. I've tried so many different techniques, meditation techniques, self-inquiry techniques, and other things, and traditional self-help and psychology techniques and NLP type stuff. Like, nothing compares to what a psychedelic can do for you. Nothing. Not even a 30-day meditation retreat, which is pretty hardcore. Most of you guys are not going to be disciplined enough to do 30 days of nonstop meditation. That's some very rare stuff. But even that will not get you to the levels of insight into the nature of reality that a psychedelic can take you to. So anyways, that's the preamble. Now let's get into explaining how do psychedelics actually work. Well, here we have to get very metaphysical, and we have to really challenge the materialistic paradigm that mainstream science is operating under, which is basically undergirding our entire culture, as a species. We have to explain somehow to ourselves how it is that we're here, what it is that we're doing here, and how it is that this thing we call reality works. And so the biggest challenge with psychedelics is that you can't use that paradigm that we have used conventionally throughout our whole life. I call this the materialistic paradigm. The paradigm of that there are molecules and atoms bouncing around that make up the universe, and the universe is 14 billion years old, and we're living on a planet here, and we're Homo sapiens that evolved over billions. This whole paradigm, this scientific materialistic paradigm of an objective external reality which existed before you were even born and will continue to exist after you die, this whole thing, you cannot understand what psychedelics truly are as long as you're coming at it from that paradigm. Because if you think that you're going to take this chemical, put it in your mouth, digest it, the chemicals are going to rush up into your brain and do stuff, change some neurons and neurotransmitters are happening in there, and then you start to hallucinate things that aren't real. This is the mainstream explanation of what a psychedelic is. From that point of view, yeah, psychedelics, they don't make sense. But if you do psychedelics with a very open mind deeply enough, long enough, you'll realize that that entire paradigm will crumble. That's not how reality works. That's not what reality is. So here's how to properly explain what psychedelics are. There is no objective external material reality, and there never was, ever. There is only mind, or we could call it consciousness. Everything that we think of as material, physical, external, objective stuff, the stuff that science measures, tables, chairs, walls, buildings, bodies, this, all this that you see, this around you, everything you're feeling and experiencing, all this material stuff. This is mind. This is universal mind. The universe is a giant mind which is imagining everything, including everything material. So atoms are imaginary, imagined by mind. Walls, bricks, buildings, cars, the earth is imagined by mind. That's the paradigm you got to be coming from. This is not a dogma that I suggest that you hold as an ideology. This is just something that I'm telling you you will discover for yourself if you go into these psychedelic experiences with an open mind. And you really want to get to the bottom of what reality is. Eventually you'll discover what I'm telling you, but it'll be difficult for you to discover this because the things that I'm telling you are shocking, and it takes an extremely open mind to accept some of these things that I'm saying. Many of these things that I'm saying are scary, frightening, destabilizing to your sense of reality and your sense of self. Okay? So the problem with the psychedelic is that it takes you so deep into the nature of what reality is that the distinction between an external reality and your own self and your own life, this collapses. And so unlike traditional science where you can just be at a distance and you can just sit over here with your telescope and look over there far away and observe some distant star or galaxy or whatever and take notes on it carefully and you can just kind of separate yourself from what's over there. This process completely breaks down with psychedelics. Precisely because what the psychedelic reveals to you is that the entire time that we've been doing what we call science, traditional science, really what that was is really we were exploring our own minds. And the real breakthrough moment in a psychedelic trip is when you realize that there is no difference between a psychedelic trip and ordinary life, what we call material life. You are hallucinating right now. Everything is a hallucination. It's not that you take a chemical and then this chemical does something to your brain to cause the brain to hallucinate imaginary stuff that isn't real, and then you come back down to your sober state and here it is, here's the truth, here's ordinary reality right now in the sober state. This is wrong. That's not what's really going on. What's really going on is that you're hallucinating right now. All of us are. And there is no reality aside from hallucination. A hallucination, technically, the definition of what a hallucination is, I use this term as a technical term. It's a very precise term. I'm not using it metaphorically. I'm using it literally and precisely. What a hallucination is its appearance without substance. Appearance without substance. And that's exactly what this is. Pure appearance without substance. It feels real, doesn't it? It feels solid. It feels tangible. You can't just walk through a brick wall. Right, because that's precisely what's being hallucinated. What's being hallucinated is a tangible, material, objective reality. And by that being hallucinated, that is what is here. And since there's nothing but that, there's nothing to contrast that against, therefore, your hallucination becomes reality. And there's nothing behind it. There's nothing behind the scenes causing it. There's no brain which is being altered to create this hallucination. The biggest misconception that scientifically minded people and rationally minded people and skeptically minded people have about psychedelics is that they think like, oh, well, Leo, so yeah, you take some chemicals. Of course, a chemical will alter your brain chemistry. And then, of course, you can see all sorts of wacky things. Of course, yeah. And so, yeah, why would any of that be truthful? How would you be able to trust any of those and all sorts of things like that? But you're misunderstanding that you're in a hallucination right now. If you're in a hallucination right now, that means the brain that you are trying to ground reality into, there ain't no such thing. So there will come a point in your tripping journey where you trip long enough, deep enough, that you realize that there never was a brain. Your brain is a hallucination. So even though it seems like, and here's where reality gets really twisted and strange loopy, it seems like you're taking a chemical and you're putting it into the body, and then that's affecting the brain. Of course, these appearances are here. There's an appearance of a chemical, there's appearance of a body, there's appearance of a brain. If you cut the brain open, you'll see some neurons and stuff in there. I'm not denying that. But all of that is appearance, hallucination. All we have to do is change what's in your consciousness, and that will go away. It will no longer be true. See? So it's not that you're taking a chemical. Really, what the chemical is, the psychedelic, it's a chemical, but what is it really? It's consciousness. You're taking consciousness, you're putting it into the body, which is also consciousness, and it's affecting consciousness. So consciousness is affecting consciousness. That's exactly right, because there's nothing but consciousness. When a rock falls on the table and makes a loud sound, that's consciousness affecting consciousness, creating consciousness. So the rock is consciousness, it hits the table, which is consciousness, and the sound it creates is consciousness. See, so there's nothing surprising about this. This is how all of reality works. Everything is consciousness interacting with itself. And psychedelics are no different. So you might wonder then, well, so what is so special about these chemicals that we can take these particular chemicals and they cause wacky hallucinations? Well, the thing is that consciousness, or infinite mind, we are inside of a giant universal infinite mind which can dream up anything. Literally, it has unlimited power to imagine anything. Right now, it happens to imagining this human sitting here speaking to that human over there. That's what it's imagining. In the next second, it can imagine something else. Usually it doesn't, because for the purposes of your survival, consciousness needs to be very rigid and consistent, because otherwise, literally what would happen is you would start to think that you're losing your mind. Imagine if you woke up tomorrow and there was a pink giant elephant sitting in the corner of your room. You would think you lost your mind. Imagine if you walk outside and the sky flickers. Usually it's blue, but now it changes to green, orange, black, white, pink, purple, and it does this 50 times a second. You would think you're having some sort of disorder. You'd think you're having a seizure or something if this was happening to you. You'd be terrified. You would probably go and check yourself into a mental hospital. But here's the mistake, is to think like, well, okay, yeah, well, if that was happening, then yeah, that is something's going wrong in my brain, and that's a mental disorder. I got to go to the hospital to fix that. No. That is the mistake. The mistake is to think that. The truth is that consciousness can be in an infinite number of different ways. It can imagine all sorts of different things. Some of them can seem sane, some of them can seem crazy or insane, but these boundaries of sane and insane, these are completely arbitrary. What you call sane is simply that which you're very comfortable and familiar with. And what you call insane is simply those things which are radical and completely out of the norm for you. See? So you have to really understand psychedelics, you have to go into it with an extremely open mind and be really willing to change your entire paradigm of reality. Because one of two things will happen. Either the psychedelic, you do enough of them that they will force you to change your notions of what reality is, throwing away all of the stuff that you learned in school and from your parents and so forth, all the stuff that science has taught you. You have to throw all that away. Either you do that, or, and this is what happens to most people, is that before you even approach that point, you will say, to hell with this, screw this is some crazy, wacky shit, I want nothing to do with it, and you'll stop. And usually what will do it is just fear. You'll be too afraid to go deep enough to really get to the point where you can understand what psychedelics are. And the reason that is, and the reason psychedelics are such a taboo topic, and the reason they're so poorly understood by scientists and even by many spiritual teachers and gurus and mystics, very poorly understood, is because they're so threatening to one's sense of self and reality. Even some enlightened guru, if he takes enough psychedelics, I can pretty much guarantee that many of his beliefs and ideas about awakening and spirituality will be shattered by the psychedelic because it's so radical. And there's really no end to it. Not that I've discovered yet. You can keep upping your doses more and more and more, and see what happens is that the psychedelic, what it does is it changes the ordinary rigid flow of consciousness. So if we think of just your entire life, the way that it goes, like every morning you wake up, then you brush your teeth, you go to work, then you come back home, you eat, you shit, you sleep, and so on, and then you do that same thing the next day, and you're kind of in a physical 3D reality that we know of. And you interact with your friends and family, all the people that you know. You go to the stores that you know and all that stuff. You're in your house that you are familiar with and all that stuff. You're in the 21st century. all of that is highly fluid and completely arbitrary and changeable in the snap of a finger. The only problem is that you've never actually had it happen to you. Psychedelics will change that for you in an instant, if you take enough of them. But the problem will be, can you handle it? See, can you handle that? Because that's very shocking when your reality starts melting around you. And what's even worse about it is not just that you take a chemical and then reality starts melting around you. No. It's way worse than that. The real scary part about it is that you realize that, oh, that life that I used to live, where I used to wake up in a house and go to the store and go to work and talk to my family and friends and blah, 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 and I was living in the 21st century, all of that, that was just a trip. All of that was a hallucination. It was just an alternative hallucination. It was a very rigid hallucination. And now I finally, for the first time in my life, I've broken out of it. That's what we call the breakthrough experience, if you ever get that. A breakthrough experience with psychedelics is an experience that's so radical that it completely recontextualizes your prior experience of life as you knew it. And it basically shows you that that thing that you thought was life, you were born, you went to school, you got married, you had children, that's all gone. It's all imaginary. You're in a new reality now. Something totally new has happened to you. And it's completely shocking and baffling. Especially because you're trying to come into it understanding it using a sort of scientific materialist paradigm where you're thinking like, well, but I thought there was like an Earth, and I thought there was a universe, there was galaxies, and I thought there were like humans and people, and we were living in the 21st century, and I thought my parents were this way, and my children were like this, and I thought my body was like this, and now all of a sudden all that stuff is gone, and now you have to refigure out what reality is. And that's extremely threatening and scary, which is why people are so negative about psychedelics. There's such a big stigma about it. Every time I talk about it, I get a bunch of shit. People, giving me a bunch of shit for it. And the reason that happens is simply because that's a defense mechanism of the ego mind. That's all that is. So, as I was saying, your whole life has been consciousness just flowing, taking different shapes and forms. Right now, it's taking this particular shape and form, and it's still flowing because, look, sounds are coming out of this mouth, talking to you, you're hearing it, you're understanding it, stuff is happening around you. This is the flow of consciousness. This is a hallucination, but it's a very specific type of hallucination. Now, what we can do is we can alter what this stream of consciousness is showing to you. Imagine, you've seen maybe in sort of behind the scenes documentaries and such, where they go to these sound recording booths for professional sound recording, and you look at this kind of mix board where they have literally hundreds, maybe even 1,000 different knobs that you can twist and turn and rotate and pull up and down, and they adjust all the different aspects of the music and the recordings that are being made. So imagine that that's what consciousness is like. Imagine that consciousness is like it's a completely free field. It's sort of like a three-dimensional, or even more than that, multi-dimensional screen. Kind of like a computer screen, but imagine a computer screen that has an infinite number of dimensions, not just two. And it has an infinite number of properties it can take. Colors, sounds, smells. Imagine a screen like this. That is consciousness. And this screen has absolutely no limits. It can display or render anything that you can imagine, and even more. Right now, it happens to be rendering and displaying what's right here. What we can do, though, is imagine that to this screen runs a giant wire, and this wire hooks up to this giant mixing board with hundreds of knobs, and each one of these knobs can be tuned and adjusted, fine-tuned, to change what is being displayed. Like if you twist this knob here, the colors will become more vivid. You twist this knob here, the colors will dim. You twist this knob here, the sounds will go wonky. They'll become louder or softer. You twist this knob here and you'll feel emotion. You'll feel love or anger or hatred or jealousy or sadness. You twist this knob over here and your body morphs. Your hand will morph into a tentacle. You twist it a little bit more, it turns into a claw. You twist it a little bit more, it turns into a wing. You twist it a little bit more, it turns into something else. And you can twist all of these, and all of these knobs control everything that's being rendered and displayed on this screen called consciousness. But then there's one master knob. It's a giant knob right at the center of the whole console. And if you turn this knob, this is the knob that we're going to call pure consciousness. Awareness itself. It's not any particular quality of consciousness. So turning this knob will not change any colors. It will not change the sounds. It will not change the feelings and emotions that you feel. Nothing like that will change. That's the content of consciousness. The content will not change. But by twisting this knob, we are simply going to increase consciousness. Now, of course, the question is, what is consciousness? Well, I have episodes about that. You can go search for those if you want a very detailed answer that's very specific. Here, I'll just say that consciousness is simply your ability to be aware of everything within the field of consciousness. All the colors, all the sounds, all the feelings, everything. All the possible objects. So by cranking this up, we're just making you hyper alert. Like super, super, super alert. Think of it as the difference, like when you're really, really sleepy, the knob is almost all the way off. If you were totally asleep, dead asleep, the knob would be, let's say, at 0. But if you're awake, but you're so sleepy that you can barely keep your eyes open, the knob is, it's a little bit on. Now, if we keep twisting towards this direction a little bit more, we twist it and we get to a point where we have ordinary current waking consciousness, what we call ordinary life, as you're aware right now. Then we can twist it even more to a point where we might get to where you might be if you did 10 days of Vipassana meditation. Imagine that you meditate for 10 days straight. If you've actually ever done that, hopefully you have, to get a reference point for what I'm talking about, then you're in a state of consciousness where you're hyper aware of everything. You're extremely sensitive. You're more conscious than normal waking consciousness. Or if you've taken, for example, a nootropic like Provigil or modafinil or R-modafinil, that will roughly put you to where you might be after a nice 10-day meditation retreat. You're very, very awake, almost like hyper-caffeinated, but also calm, not super, hyper and jittery. But that's just the beginning of what this knob can do. This is sort of the normal range that most people have ever experienced in their life. But this knob can keep being twisted and twisted and twisted, and it has no end. The knob twists forever in this direction. You can keep twisting it more and more and more and more towards more and more and more consciousness. Eventually, if you twist this knob enough, you will become so conscious that you're conscious of the entire universe. Try to imagine this as a possibility. Open your mind to this possibility. That if we twist this knob enough, we twist it 100 times over itself, you will become so conscious that you're conscious of the entire universe. You have literal omniscience. And then, of course, there's a bunch of gradations before that. So before we get to that, you can become conscious of a lot of different stuff before you get to omniscience. So the most important thing So here's how psychedelics work. The most important thing that a psychedelic does is that it twists this major knob, the main knob of consciousness. It makes you a lot more conscious of everything in your visual field and auditory field and in your physical body. It makes you orders of magnitude more conscious than you would be from a meditation retreat. Even if you meditated for 30 days straight, you'll be more conscious than that. And that's on a moderate dose of psychedelics. If you take a high dose of psychedelics, you can be orders of magnitude more conscious than even that. These are levels of consciousness which are so conscious that it's terrifying. It's frightening. It's completely beyond human consciousness. You're not a human anymore at this point. You go into what I call God consciousness. God consciousness because you become universal and you become literally omniscient. As amazing as that sounds. But see, what complicates the situation is that the psychedelic doesn't just twist this consciousness knob and leave everything else the same. Because if we only twist this knob, this room would still be here, all the colors and sounds would be exactly as they are. But every psychedelic twists a bunch of different knobs. It has a unique sort of character profiles. So almost no psychedelic only twists the consciousness knob. They all twist the conscious knob to some degree, some more than others, but then they also twist a lot of minor knobs which start to mess around with stuff like colors, sounds, feelings, textures, thoughts, emotions, objects, all sorts of weird stuff can start happening. So here's the trick with understanding psychedelics. This is the key, is that when it starts to come on, your visual field most prominently will start to morph and start to wave and melt. The higher the dose, the more it will morph and melt. Because what you're literally doing is you're sort of disrupting the ordinary flow of consciousness. Think of consciousness like a river. Imagine sort of like a small stream, actually, for this metaphor. And you now take a giant boulder or a log and you throw it in the middle of this small stream. It's going to start to divert the water, and the water is going to flow in a different pattern than it normally does. So that's sort of pretty much what you're doing when you're taking this chemical. You're interrupting the ordinary hallucination that you're having your whole life. The thing you call your life, that's a hallucination. You're interrupting that, and you're changing it. So, of course, colors can change, emotions, feelings can change, objects can change, and so forth. And the sky is the limit. Just like with a little stream, if you get some giant boulders and logs, you can block up the entire stream and you can divert all that water to flow in a totally different direction. Something radically different than what you traditionally call your life. This will depend on the dose and the method by which you take the psychedelic and the kind of psychedelic you take and so forth. And every psychedelic will be different. If you throw a log into the river, that will divert the river in a slightly different way than if you throw a stone, versus if you throw, some sand in there or whatever. And so those different objects are like the different types of psychedelics, like LSD or mushrooms or DMT, 5-MeO or whatever. See? So here's the problem, is that because ordinarily people are not trained for pure consciousness. You're only really trained to be able to recognize pure consciousness, this central dial, if you do a lot of meditation. But since most people are very poor meditators, they're not technically proficient meditators, so they don't have enough experience with this. So when they take a psychedelic, like a high school kid takes a psychedelic, the first thing you notice is that all the colors start to go wavy and crazy. And you start to look at a wall and you might see a face in it. This kind of stuff. And yeah, these are hallucinations. That's because the psychedelic is twisting these minor knobs. And your attention gets distracted to the minor stuff. to the colors and sounds that are changing. You might listen to some music and you might see, oh, wow, that's some beautiful music. The music is especially beautiful on the psychedelic. I mean, of course, that's true. That's because the music dial has been tuned. Or you might look at a tree and the tree looks especially beautiful because the colors are so neon and vibrant. Of course, that's true because the neon color dial was tuned differently than it usually is. And you might look at the floor, at the carpet, and you might see weird patterns in the carpet that you didn't see before. Like you might see faces and dinosaurs and animals and demons and whatever else. And that's because that image recognition dial of consciousness has been tuned so that you can now see images and patterns that you weren't able to see before. And while all that's happening, you're being hypnotized and mesmerized by this changing content of consciousness so much that you can ignore sort of the meta thing that's really going on, which is that you're becoming more conscious. The central dial has also been tuned. And what's really most important for our work here, if you want to understand what consciousness is and how psychedelics work, is you really got to focus your attention on this major dial. One of the common criticisms that I hear about psychedelics, even from many enlightened gurus and masters and mystics and spiritual teachers, is they will always throw out the objection like, oh, well, but enlightenment is not a state. And all you're doing with these psychedelics, Leo, you're just changing your state. And it's just a temporary change. And then you come back and, I mean, it's just a state change. Big deal. Except this grossly oversimplifies the problem and underappreciates really what psychedelics are. When someone says this, they really, it shows their lack of experience with psychedelics. Because yes, of course it's a state change, but everything is a state. Right now, I'm in a state, you're in a state. If you're awake, if you're sleepy, that's a state you're in. If you're asleep, then that's the state you're in. If you're horny, then that's the state you're in. If you're angry, then that's the state you're in. If you're very meditative, then that's the state you're in. There is nothing but states of consciousness. Consciousness is all that there is. Now, of course, the trick with the psychedelic, the value of the psychedelic, is not merely that you get to change states of consciousness. The value of the psychedelic, I would say, is more of a meta value. It's the fact that you get to watch consciousness as it changes its states. In so doing, it's not that you're getting attached to some new state. So it's not that I'm sitting there and I'm looking at the carpet and I'm seeing some face in the carpet and I'm saying, oh, this face is the truth or whatever. No. It's a meta thing that's happening. What you're actually doing is that your mind is able to experience the new state and compare it to memories of your old state, compare the two and see like, oh, so this is what is really going on. This is really how consciousness works. So the value of the psychedelic is that it shows you the fluidity of consciousness. That's one of the key values. Just the fact that you get to change states and change into very radically different states, that's a huge eye-opening experience. Do not underestimate the value of that. That alone right there will change your whole life. To be able to pop out of your life and look back upon it as though it was all an imaginary hallucination, just one state, even though you're looking at it, of course, from some other state. When you come back to your ordinary life after your trip is over, that still changes you. That changes you forever. Because most people have never had the experience of being able to pop out of life and look at it from a different state. Most people's minds are so closed, they don't recognize that consciousness is capable of extremely radical states. See? Most people are so underestimating reality, including spiritual masters and meditation teachers and gurus and enlightened people. Even they are underestimating what consciousness can do. Because what a psychedelic can do for you is orders of magnitude more than what they can achieve through their meditations. You see, when you're meditating, mostly for spiritual work, what meditation does is it works on the central knob of consciousness. If you sit and you just focus on a wall for 10 hours straight, you're going to become so hyper-focused, you're turning this consciousness dial up and up and up. And that's great. That's very useful for meditation. That could lead to awakenings, to enlightenments, to insights about reality, and all that is good. That's what spirituality is about. That's what meditation is for. But it's a lot harder for you to tune and to even know that there exist other knobs to consciousness. It's not like you can just sit there in meditation and automatically imagine a pink elephant and it appears. You can't do that. That's hard. Now, actually, technically it's possible. If you sit and you imagine a pink elephant while you're meditating, and you do this for months on end, like industrial grade meditation, I'm talking about 10 hours a day for months on end, you will actually be able to see a pink elephant if you did that with enough intention and focus and serious commitment. But it would be so much work that it's outside the realm of most people's abilities, or there's really also, I mean, what would be the value in it? Not much value either, you see. So see, most people don't recognize that this is possible. Except a few people who have done serious yoga and serious visualization exercises as part of their spiritual practice, then they can have an idea that such things are possible. But with a psychedelic, this becomes effortless. You don't need to train for months. You can do it instantly, effortlessly, and much more vividly than you can even with months of visualization practice. So most spiritual people, they don't understand that there are all these other miscellaneous knobs to consciousness. Some of them are very, very radical. Imagine I twist a knob of consciousness, and if I twist this knob, you won't be able to tell the difference between people and animals anymore, and inanimate objects. There will be no difference between a table, your mother, and a dog if I twist this knob. Imagine another knob that I can twist. If I twist this knob, time stops. Now, of course, that's actually one that you can access through meditation fairly easily. Advanced meditators can access this knob, and they can make time stop, basically. But imagine a knob where you can turn this knob and time flows backwards. You would think like, what? That's impossible. How could that happen? Science says it's impossible. But you have to understand, science is part of what you're hallucinating. Science is a hallucination. Part of this thing right here that you're hallucinating. When I twist this knob of time flowing backwards, by the time I've twisted that thing, all science has flown out the window. There is no more science at that point. Because your science requires this state that you're in right now to maintain it. One of the biggest problems with science is that scientists don't recognize that all of modern mainstream science is done within one out of an infinite number of different states of consciousness. So science really has been mapping a single state of consciousness the entire time. Imagine that a scientist got stuck in a dream, his own dream, a single dream from one night. He got stuck in it, and he kept exploring that dream and doing science within that dream. And he thought that he understood everything about that dream because he mapped it all out, measured everything, cataloged everything. He knows everything about how that dream works. And then he wakes up, only to realize like, oh, that was just a dream, and all of my science no longer is applicable because that science was inside of that bubble, which now has popped. And then the next night he goes into a new dream, and in that new dream, everything has changed. It's a totally different dream. New physics, new rules, new cause and effects, everything is different. Now he has to restart all of his science. See, that's analogous to what modern mainstream science is doing. It's only exploring one state of consciousness. And there are not just 2 or 3 different ones. There are millions of them. Of course, just to admit this is extremely threatening to science as a whole, because what scientist wants to admit that he's devoted his entire career to studying a dream, one out of millions of dreams? And that there are higher dreams, there are lower dreams and higher dreams, and that he's been studying the lower dreams, some of the lowest dreams, not the highest ones. See, that's how tricky this stuff is. Imagine that I twist a knob and you stop being human and you turn into a beer bottle. I twist the knob again and you turn into a pine cone. I twist the knob again, you turn into a kangaroo. I twist the knob some more and you turn into the entire human race. Not a single person, the entire human race. I twist the knob some more, you turn into the planet, the entire planet. I twist the knob some more, and you turn into the color red. You're not a living being anymore, you're the color red. Sounds trippy, sounds impossible, right? And yet there is such a knob, and many, many other knobs. There are so many knobs that do so many freaky things that there's not enough words in the English language to explain them all to you. It would be like explaining color to a colorblind person, or just to a blind person, I guess, is even better. So you might say, well, okay, Leo, but what? So what? So yeah, there are all these knobs, but what do these knobs get me? Okay, so I turn into a kangaroo and then I come back. What's the big deal? Well, the big deal is just the fact that you became a kangaroo and came back. That completely changes your whole life. That's a huge deal. You can't look at reality the same way again. And even a kangaroo is not weird enough, because you might think, you might even have some sort of spiritual belief in the back of your mind that says like, well, yeah, I mean, people talk about reincarnation, so maybe I used to be a kangaroo in the past, now I'm a human, maybe next time I'll be a dog or something, or an alien. Okay. That's still sort of within the realm of possibility. I mean, it's sort of science fiction-y and crazy, but still, it's at least something you can imagine. You can imagine being a kangaroo. Try to imagine what it's like to be a beer bottle. That's tough. What would that be like? What would your attitude be towards life, towards people, towards society, towards science, towards religion, if you became a beer bottle for a day and then you came back? What would that tell you about your humanity? You see, if this actually happened to you, your entire life would change. Even though you would be back, and in a certain sense, nothing would have changed because you're back, you're a human, now you're in human form. I'm not saying you need to be a beer bottle for the rest of your life. I'm just saying just the fact that you experience it for a little bit already changes something in you. It's sort of like, imagine if you lived in a comfortable gated neighborhood your whole life in some upscale suburb in California, and you grew up in this sort of cloistered, perfect neighborhood. It was all beautiful and nice, and you went to nice schools and ate nice food and nice roads, nice cars, nice people, nice police. Everything is calm, quiet, peaceful, beautiful. There are neighborhoods like this in California. In fact, I lived in some of them when I was younger. And then imagine you take one of these people, let's say a teenager, 18 years old, who's lived in this idyllic California gated community somewhere like in Beverly Hills, and then we take them from that and we throw them into Somalia or Liberia, the Congo, or somewhere in the middle of Syria or Iraq into a war-torn area with drug dealers, gang rape, child slavery, genocide, cannibalism. This is not fantasy. These countries and these kind of life experiences exist right now in the 21st century in certain parts of the world. People are going through those experiences right now, as you're sitting here in the comfort of your cozy little domicile listening to me. Somebody else right now is getting, gang raped, or is a child slave, or is getting shot and tortured. So imagine we take this teen, we throw him in the middle of Liberia somewhere, then he has to deal with that for a few days, and then we throw him back to his Beverly Hills, upscale neighborhood. Is he going to be the same person after that? No. When he sees, cannibalism and gang rape and slavery and all this stuff, he's going to come back and he's going to look at that neighborhood in a totally different way. And that's exactly what psychedelics do. Now, of course, it doesn't have to be negative. It can also be positive. Conversely, we could take a child or a teen who grew up in Liberia or in Somalia or wherever, some terrible part of the world, and we could plop him into the best neighborhood in Hollywood and have him live there for a few days and then plop him back. And that's going to change him too. See, he's going to see new possibilities. See, he couldn't have even imagined some of the stuff that's there in that expensive neighborhood. He couldn't have even dreamed of such things while living in that hellhole that he was living in. So that's what psychedelics allow you to do, except even more powerful than that. Because these differences are still within the realm of physical reality. We can imagine an even more radical situation where we take a kid from Iraq and we throw him to a new planet with an alien civilization that is 100,000 years more advanced than humanity, with teleportation devices and weird hovering technology and telepathic communication abilities and all sorts of crazy stuff. They figured out how to make their bodies immortal, right? So all this crazy stuff that they figured out from the wildest science fiction movies. Imagine we plop a kid from Iraq into that for a day, and then we bring him back. That's a little bit more what it's like to take a psychedelic. That's how radical that is. And even that is still not radical enough, because even in that example, we're still within the three-dimensional physical material world. See? It changes you. It can change you profoundly. Now, also, it's not a cure-all. I'm not saying that you do this. If you take a kid from Iraq and you throw him into Beverly Hills for a week and then you put him back into Iraq, is he going to all of a sudden be an instant, Hollywood celebrity back in Iraq? No, of course not. A week is not long enough to pick up and learn everything there is to learn about what it's like to be an American elite. There's so much there to learn. So that's the challenge with psychedelics. The psychedelic has so much to teach you, yet it gives you so little time, relatively speaking. Even a long trip of 8 hours, some of the longest psychedelics, let's say LSD, can give you a solid, maybe 6, really, even LSD doesn't give you that much time. It gives you about 6 solid hours of tripping and then some after effects that linger for another 4 or 5 hours. But the solid trip itself only lasts about 6 hours. So in those 6 hours, that's a lot of time, but they pass so fast when you're in a totally new realm. And there's so much to learn there about yourself and about reality and consciousness that it flies by in seconds. and then you're back. And yeah, of course, you can't hold it all. It's too much. It's way too much. So one of the biggest challenges is that you come back and you're like, well, what the hell was that? How do I make sense of that? How do I embody that? How do I bring a piece of that back into ordinary life? That's challenging, but you also can. You can bring back, you're not going to bring back the whole thing. You're going to bring back 1% of it. And you might say, oh, well, 1%, that's so piddly. But 1% of a giant thing is still significant. See? And then, of course, you can go back and you can trip again and again and again. And not only will you be going back to the same places again and again and again, you will be going to new places. Further and further, each trip will expand your capacity to go further and deeper and explore more and more territory, explore more and more corners of consciousness, and it just keeps growing you more and more. And each time you come back, you bring 1% back, 1% back, 1% back. Well, if you do it 100 times, that's 100% right there. It takes work. It's not easy. This is not some magic pill. And it takes a lot of work to sit there and to contemplate it all after you come back. Because you're going to see such crazy and radical things in these trips that when you come back, you're going to be like, what the fuck was that? And you're going to spend a week just in the shower. What the fuck was that? Cooking your food. What the fuck was that? Driving to work. What the fuck was that? Sitting at work doing your work. What the fuck was that? Thinking that. Trying to wrap your mind around it. Trying to remember it and trying to figure it out. And that's a very, very valuable process. You might, by doing that process, this is what I call integration work, by contemplating that, you'll actually be able to extract a few more percent. So rather than just bring back 1%, by contemplating it, you'll bring back 3%, 4%, 5%, depending on how good you contemplate. And so over time, this all adds up. And before you know it, 50 or 100 trips into this, your whole life has been turned upside down, and in a positive way. Because what's happening is that your sense of what reality is being expanded. You're being pushed beyond your comfort zone, metaphysically, epistemologically, psychologically. And of course, it's not just about, don't get me wrong here, it's not just about exploring some alien territories. That's actually not mostly what it's about. A lot of these trips are about exploring your own self, what you are, your own psyche, your own past, your own memories, your own wounds and grudges and fears, and trying to figure out your own life, what your purpose here is in life, how to live your life better, and so forth. Because even though the psychedelics can tune all these other little minor knobs, the most important knob is the central knob of consciousness. By tuning that up, that makes you more conscious of everything about yourself and about reality. And that is really the whole, not the whole, but the majority of the value of the psychedelic is tuning that knob. Because by tuning the consciousness knob up, you can contemplate and introspect and have profound insights into the nature of anything. Science, relationships, sexuality, business, life, death, awakening, spirituality, politics, social sciences, race relations, love, emotions, psychology, psychotherapy, you name it, it doesn't matter. Any topic will be enhanced with more consciousness. Whatever you're interested in. But practically speaking, what's going to make the biggest difference for most people is tuning up that knob of consciousness as high as it can go, and then introspecting and trying to get to the bottom of who you are, why you're here, what is life, what is reality, what is existence, what is love, what are emotions, what is the mind, these sorts of existential questions. All of these questions can be answered, and the insights you get are legitimate, highly truthful insights. Now, of course, it is possible to delude yourself. And the less pure that you are, the more wounds you have, the more shadow material, the more psychic baggage you have, the more dysfunctional you are in your life, the less mature you are, the less developed you are, the less conscious you are, generally speaking, the more likely you are to delude yourself with these psychedelic experiences. But then again, that's true in your ordinary hallucination as well, this hallucination you're in right now. See, the key mistake that scientists and rationalists and skeptics make about psychedelics is they think like, well, but Leo, if I go into that psychedelic realm, how will I know that it's true? But even to ask that question that question is being asked from such an ignorant place. Because if you were at that realm, if you understood how this knob of consciousness works, you would just laugh. Because this current state that you're in, this hallucination that you're taking for granted, this default hallucination that you're in right now, this is one of the lowest, least truthful, most delusional of all the possible hallucinations. See, the scientist makes the mistake of thinking like, well, okay, if I take the psychedelic, it's going to take me to some sort of hallucination land, and hallucination land won't be as real land, what we call life, material reality. And then when I come back to material reality, how will I know that that hallucination land, it was just a hallucination. And now I'm back in real reality. No. It works exactly the opposite way. You take the psychedelic, you go into real land, you look back upon where you came from, and this is hallucination land. This is delusion land right here, right now. What's going on here? Material reality. So, how is this possible, you might wonder? If you're still struggling to stomach some of the radical possibilities I've put forth here, the reason that is because your model of reality, your paradigm, is actually incapable of reconciling what I'm saying. Because what I'm saying doesn't square with material reality that you learned in middle school. The reality of bouncing atoms and molecules and all that. It doesn't square with that. It doesn't square with the reality that consciousness is created by a brain. That's right. Those are stories. Those are paradigms and models that are completely inadequate for understanding reality at its highest levels. That's kindergarten stuff. All the advanced science you think you're doing, it's kindergarten stuff compared to what you get when you're really conscious. And that means you have to be open-minded and humble enough to say, okay, I have to be able to admit that my old paradigms were wrong and highly limited. They're not all wrong, they're just extremely limited in scope, is the point. And you have to be willing to open your mind and to go explore new realities and contemplate and figure out new paradigms. Your paradigms need to be completely retooled. That takes intellectual work and emotional labor. It's not just the work of sitting there and doing math equations. That's easy work. The really hard work is that for you to access and to understand reality at the highest levels, you have to change as a being, as who you are. Your whole emotional system needs to change. All of your entire web of beliefs of how reality works needs to change. But how is it going to change when you're so attached to it? When your career hinges on it? When your family and your relationships hinge on it? Are you willing to give all that up in order to understand reality? If not, then you've confined yourself to this little limited domain, and that's where you will remain. You're like an ant. An ant, all it knows is the little surrounds, maybe a 1 mile radius around its ant colony in the rainforest somewhere, and nothing else. That's all you'll ever know. You'll always be that ant. You'll never understand anything about the planet except that 1 mile radius around your little ant colony. That's what most scientists are like. That's what most religious people are like. That's what most spiritual people are like. That's what most ordinary people who do just normal self-improvement and they just want money and a house and a family and so forth. That's what they're like. They'll never know what's beyond. It takes courage to venture beyond. It takes radical open-mindedness. It takes risk. There's risk involved with it. All exploration involves risk. You never know what you're going to find. That's the very nature of exploration. You don't know what's out there. Maybe you'll find some terrible demon who will kill you. Maybe. Or maybe you'll find God who will bless you. Maybe. Maybe you'll find some alien. Maybe. You don't know until you go there and see. So the paradigm that you need to be able to make sense of psychedelics is the following one. Throw away your old materialist paradigm. Throw away the idea that there's a brain that generates consciousness through neurons and chemicals. This is a fiction. There never was such a thing. Your new paradigm is that there never was an objective, material, external reality. There is no reality outside of appearance and subjective perception. None. Reality is consciousness, and there is nothing but consciousness, which means that reality is an infinite mind. This mind can imagine anything. Right now, it happens to be imagining this body sitting here speaking to you, and that body over there sitting there listening to me. That's what it happens to be imagining right now. The next second, who knows what it could imagine? It can imagine anything it wants. But it just so happens that it keeps imagining something consistent so that we can get a sense of reality. Because if it imagines something totally new right now, there would be no sense of reality. You would be basically like in a dream. The only difference between a dream and reality is that here in reality, it's very stable. Consciousness is extremely stable. That's what makes it feel real and concrete. You might say, well, Leo, if everything was just an illusion, like you're saying, everything was a hallucination, I should be able to walk through a wall. No, you shouldn't, because the hallucination is that you can't walk through a wall. You're hallucinating solidity. You see, throw away your stupid, simplistic, naive ideas of what a hallucination is. I'm talking about a robust, deeply sophisticated notion of hallucination. Hallucinations that are so real you cannot distinguish them from reality. Hallucinations that are so mesmerizing that imagine that you started imagining that you were a kangaroo and you just sat there day after day after day imagining that you were a kangaroo, and you imagined it so much that you literally became a kangaroo and you could not remember anymore that you were ever a human. That's the kind of power of imagination that I'm talking about. That is the power of infinite mind. Everything that is occurring and can ever occur has only occurred and will ever occur inside of an infinite mind. This mind is not connected to a brain of any kind. It's not happening inside of any computer. It's pure mind. Pure mind. That's what this is. That's what you are. That's what psychedelics are. And material reality is one out of an infinite number, literally an infinite number of states of consciousness that are possible, that are inside of this mind. Material reality is a special case. And if you're a scientifically inclined person, then you should appreciate this term and this concept of a special case. A special limiting case of something much broader and more general. For example, there's Einstein's general relativity, and then there's special relativity, Einstein's special relativity. Einstein first developed special relativity, which explained time dilation and the relativity of motion in like basically a single direction. It was uniform motion, basically velocity. It didn't deal with accelerations. But then Einstein, he came up with his special relativity, and it was very groundbreaking in this paradigm-shattering discovery for physics, which basically showed that time time dilated depending on how your velocity was changing and so forth, and it showed that velocity and distances and all this and the speed of light and how these things are relative depending on the position of the reference frame. So it's kind of complicated, but I'm just glossing over it here. So that was special relativity. But then, he came up with that and he said, okay, we got that, but what about, more complicated types of motion? What about acceleration? Because I haven't accounted for acceleration yet. And then he came up with general relativity, which was his crowning achievement, but see, general relativity, it didn't nullify special relativity. What Einstein realized is that, special relativity is just a special confined instance of a more broad dynamic of relativity, which we're going to call general relativity, which includes accelerations, because velocity is just, you can wrap velocity into acceleration. Velocity is just a special case of acceleration where acceleration is zero. See? So that's the analogy we're using here to try to explain material reality. Material reality is just a special case of an infinite number of states that consciousness can imagine. When consciousness is imagining something very consistently, like it's the same this second, it's again the same the next second, and again the next second, then the illusion of reality and concreteness and materiality is created. But if on second 1, this is a hand, on second 2, it's a flipper, on second 3, it's a claw, on second 4, it's a tentacle, on second 5, it's a wing, you see, then you're going to call that something crazy. You're not going to call that reality. But of course, you have to recognize that what you call reality is completely relative and arbitrary. You just call reality whatever you're familiar with, for the most part. So, that's the paradigm you got to have. Universal mind. Imagining everything with no limits. There's no limits to what it can imagine. But there also are limits to what your human body and this life can do, because you are sort of in this life and in this body for now. And as long as you're here and you want this particular stream of consciousness to continue, you have to understand that creates certain constraints, serious constraints, such that even when you take a psychedelic, you're going to have to take a lot of psychedelic to completely leave your body behind. On a moderate dose of psychedelics, you're still going to have almost total control of your body. You're still going to be able to feel your body, move your body, do things, no problem. You'll be able to walk and talk and do that. But I mean, if you take a really massive dose, even your body will disappear, melt away. But those get into dangerous territory. When you get into doses like that, you're playing with a loaded gun, and that's why psychedelics, rightly so, are feared. Because when you get into high doses like that, at that point, potentially you could hurt yourself physically. You could overdose. Certain psychedelics are actually lethal at very high doses. Others are not. For example, mushrooms, you basically can't overdose on those. You can eat 30 grams of mushrooms and you'll still be alive. But the problem is not just physical. The problem is also mental. Because at such high doses, reality will be warped so seriously that it's really going to be difficult psychologically to handle what's happening to you. You're going to be torn apart. Your whole mind and your whole paradigm of reality will be torn to pieces so fast and so radically that you're not just going to be able to sit there and carefully piece it all together. No, it's like you're going to get a sledgehammer to the skull sort of thing. And then you'll be picking up the pieces for a year to come. And it can terrify you. It can cause panic attacks, whatever, a lot of it depends on how much you can handle. How mature are you? How serious are you? Are you pacing yourself properly, or are you overdosing? You know, you can get to those high doses, but you got to slowly ramp up to it. You can't just jump into it with cold feet. You got to become an experienced psychonaut. You got to do 50 trips first on mild doses before you're able to do a high dose and handle it successfully in a healthy way that doesn't come back and hurt you and leave you with some sort of PTSD or nightmares or something. So let me explain a little bit further about what's really going on. This is where it gets kind of incredible. Well, let's see if you're open-minded enough. I'll just tell it to you straight. So what's really happening with the psychedelic is that the psychedelic interferes with the dream that God has been dreaming, which is your life. You are God, which is infinite mind, pure infinite mind, that decided to dream up a particular dream, the one that you're in right now, this material dream. And this material dream had to be very, very stable and persistent, because if it wasn't, you couldn't have a stable mind or a stable life. You couldn't raise a family. You couldn't have a society. You couldn't be a functioning member of society if there wasn't a stable earth and a stable society that you could be a member of. You see? So universal mind, God's mind, imagined your particular life, and it's imagining it right now as I'm speaking. Try to maybe become conscious of this as I'm speaking if you can. You are God imagining all this. And the psychedelic will interfere with that pre-planned dream that you're dreaming. Now, of course, the psychedelic is also part of the dream that you're dreaming, so it's not like psychedelics go against God. I mean, God imagines psychedelics just as much as anything else. So it's not like you're doing anything against God's will here. But it will interrupt the flow of the ordinary dream and shift you into some new territory, some new kind of dream. And when you take a psychedelic, what happens is that literally everything starts to melt around you. You can really feel the fluidity of consciousness. That's one of the biggest things you feel on a psychedelic. The difference between rigid consciousness, as it is right now, versus fluid consciousness, where everything is morphing around. And what's really happening there is the following thing, is that God's mind is sort of opening up and expanding to its infinite potential, into more abstract and abstract layers of pure imagination. At the highest levels of imagination, there are no fixed rules or objects of any kind. Everything is amorphous and fluid because it's literally just as though coming out of the mind. See? In the same way that thoughts formulate in your mind as you're writing a sentence or writing a paper or an article, in the same way, thoughts or even material objects are sort of formulated in the mind of God before they materialize. So you don't notice that right now because they're already materialized here. It's solid, it's locked in. But with the psychedelic, consciousness will open up, become more fluid, and you will actually enter the stream of imagination through which God imagines all of existence, including your current material life. You will be able to look at your hand, for example, and you will see how you are actually literally imagining this hand into existence as God. And the psychedelic makes this imagination process so fluid and so creative and so open, so abstract and so amorphous, that literally you can look at a wall and you can think of an elephant and you will see an elephant in the wall because as it turns out, that's the actual mechanism by which all of reality is created. It's not really that you're hallucinating or something is wrong with you. You're not going crazy if you see an elephant in the wall. What's happening is, really, law of attraction is happening. But law of attraction is happening at such an elevated state of consciousness that literally you are materializing the things that you are thinking. Will and thought and materialization and potential and actual, all of these merge into one. And from this super fluid state, you are able to imagine entirely new worlds and realities. You know how when you're daydreaming, you can just sit there, maybe in class, you're bored, when you used to be in, literature class or something in high school. You were so bored, you would just sit there, stare out the window, and just daydream as the teacher was yakking on about Shakespeare or something. And you were sitting there, you're just daydreaming about some video game world that you wanted to inhabit. And you just got lost in this sort of reverie of this sort of fantasy world. You went into this world, you were running around as an elf, doing something, fighting somebody, whatever. That is a little taste, a little microcosm of what can really happen, what God is doing on the macro level. Of course, you as a human have such limited capacity for imagination, but when you crank up the consciousness and you crank up all these other dials, your imagination goes through the roof, your creativity goes through the roof. You literally tap into the source of creativity, pure infinite creativity, which is responsible for the creation and the imagination of all of material reality. This pure creativity is responsible for creating atoms, molecules, planets, galaxies, science, mankind, languages, animals, you name it. And you're tapping into that, and it feels so surreal and unbelievable because it's too good to be true. Here you were living this ordinary life, thinking that reality is just material and physical, and now, one day, you find yourself in the nexus of creation where God's mind is creating the entire fucking universe, and you discover that that's you who's been doing it the whole time. It's utterly shocking and astounding. It's so astounding that you won't want to believe it. Because people have told you, oh, it's egotistical to say that you're God. Only a narcissist would claim that he's God. You're imagining the entire fucking universe. What does that make you? That makes you God. Reality is pure imagination. Ta-da! But to really comprehend what that means, to actually experience it, not just to hear it from me as a story, not just to take it on as a dogma or as an ideology, but to really live that, even for a short while, that takes a lot. That takes a lot of maturity and development from you. It takes a lot of curiosity and open-mindedness. It takes a lot of fearlessness, selflessness. You already have to be on the spiritual path. One of the biggest mistakes that people who take psychedelics make is simply that the people who take it, because psychedelics are sort of an underground thing, quasi-illegal in certain parts of the world, it's such a sort of a shady area, of course. Why is it shady? Because it disrupts the nature of what reality is. You can't build a society without outlawing psychedelics, at least not society in its current form. So of course, society represses these things and forces them underground, stigmatizes them, demonizes them, because this is the greatest threat to society. This is the greatest threat to power. This is the greatest threat to people who want money, power, and sex and selfishness. See? So understand why psychedelics are demonized. They're demonized for a very good reason. Not because they're physically going to harm you or cause you to lose your mind, but because they threaten power structures. And they threaten the whole sense of reality that our culture has constructed, which is artificial and super limited. So, lost my train of thought. There's so many, when my mind thinks, it's thinking so many parallel trains of thought at once that the most difficult thing for me to do is to pick any particular one. It's like I'm multi-parallel processing 10 strands at once. And so keeping track of all of them at the same time, that's like the most difficult thing that I have to deal with in teaching this stuff. Because I can only speak one thing at a time, but my mind is thinking 10 different chains of thought at once. So anyways, I lost that one, but let's pick up on another one. All right, so I told you the new paradigm you need. It's all infinite imagination, understand that. Oh yeah, I was saying, the biggest problem with psychedelic users, they're so immature. Because it's this underground thing, they're so immature and so underdeveloped that when they take a psychedelic, a lot of times what they get is they get a reflection of their own inner self, this nasty, ugly, underdeveloped, devilish, demonic inner self. Yeah, then they get terrified and they run away and they never do a psychedelic again. Yeah, of course. Of course. But when a pure person takes a psychedelic, it's a completely different experience. The determining factor with psychedelics is not the substance itself that you take, or even the dose. It's your internal purity. How pure is your mind? How pure is your heart? How much shadow material do you have? That really determines how your trip is going to go. The purer you are in heart and mind and soul and spirit, the more selfless you are, the more work you've done on yourself, the more mature you are, the more developed you are, the more open-minded you are, the more fearless you are, the more curious you are. The deeper you contemplate, the better your trips will go. And the more insight you'll gather. Now, of course, people wonder, well, Leo, but how do you know you can trust these insights? It's a foolish question because insight is insight. Insight is a direct consciousness into the nature of a thing, some aspect of reality. When you have a direct insight, it's absolutely true. Now, of course, you can misinterpret insights quite easily. So I'm not saying this is foolproof. There's a lot of self-deception potential here, but then again, there's everywhere. But what you'll discover with psychedelics is that the insights are more true and more powerful and more certain than anything that you are able to access in ordinary waking consciousness, ordinary life. Really, what you should be questioning is, why do you attach so much importance and truth and significance to ordinary consciousness, ordinary life right here? This is just a hallucination. After all, even under the scientific materialist paradigm, what does science tell you? Science tells you that you have neurotransmitters flowing through your brain all the time. Not only when you take a psychedelic, all the time. Right now, if you want to believe science, there are neurotransmitters running through your head right now, which are responsible for generating all the colors, sounds, and everything here. Without those neurotransmitters, you could not understand the words that I'm saying, nor could you recognize yourself or myself as human beings. You could not access memories. You could not understand what time or space are. Right? So my question to you is, how myopic would you have to be, if that's the case, that if this current experience you're having is completely dominated by neurotransmitters? How myopic would you have to be? How arrogant would you have to be to think that this current configuration of neurotransmitters is the one true one, the one from which you can understand what's true and what's false? See, So the irony of people who criticize psychedelics is that they themselves are doing it from a state of hallucination, but they're so ignorant and oblivious and lacking in self-reflection that they don't understand that what they're doing is they're criticizing psychedelics from a state of hallucination and delusion. They're not self-aware enough to realize that, oh, well, neurotransmitters are governing my entire state right now. So if I'm sitting here thinking that, oh, those psychedelics, they must be stupid, they must be false, that's being run by the neurotransmitters in here. So now imagine what happens if we change the neurotransmitter cocktail to something else. Which neurotransmitter cocktail is the one true one that allows you to access the truth? Well, the mistake is thinking that there is one cocktail. I'm not saying there's one cocktail. You're saying there's only one cocktail, and you're taking your current cocktail as the one true one. What I'm telling you is that there's an infinite number of cocktails. There is no one true one. The truth is that all cocktails are relative. And they just generate appearances. And that's it. That is the truth. The truth is not a particular vision or cocktail that you have or see. The truth is a meta thing. The truth is not one particular state of consciousness. The truth is the realization that everything is a state of consciousness and that there is nothing but states of consciousness. That's the real truth. And psychedelics are very helpful for getting you to access that. You see, one of the things that these enlightened masters and teachers who poo-poo psychedelics, one of the things they don't tell you when they tell you that psychedelics just change your state. Yes, psychedelics change your state, but this is so foolish because different states grant you different access to insight and truth. Not all states are the same. And this current state you're in, I got news for you, this is one of the worst possible states for accessing truth. There are 100 other states of consciousness that are way better, way clearer for accessing truth. And the only way you're going to know that is by entering those states. You can't stay in your current state and judge some other state out there. You have to be wise enough to recognize that, oh, I could be trapped inside of a state. I need to break out of this state and see other states before I can really determine how good my original state was. You see, you can't just start out assuming that your state is the best state. That's as silly as the way that humans used to think that the earth was the center of the universe and that the sun and everything else revolved around the earth. Why did they think that? Because they were so myopic and self-centered that they just thought that, well, this current configuration is the best one and it must be the center of everything. I got news for you. It ain't the center of anything. This is just one planet orbiting one star inside of a giant galaxy with billions of stars and then a universe with billions and billions more of galaxies, just like this one, with trillions of planets and God knows what else. That's the scope we're talking about here. Your current state of consciousness is as limited as living on Earth compared to all the other planets in the universe. That's how limited your experience of consciousness and reality is. So taking psychedelics is not about achieving some wonderful state, some blissful state. It's about getting insight into the nature of how the entire system works. And it's very useful to enter certain states to get that insight. And this is precisely why meditation is done. Meditation is you sitting there, focusing intently, single-pointedly on a single object in your mind or out in the world for long periods of time, such that your mind focuses so much that literally your state of consciousness starts to change naturally. Now, of course, this takes a lot of work to do. What a psychedelic can do in 5 minutes will take you 5 years of meditation practice. But if you want, you can do it through meditation. And in fact, if you're an advanced meditator, what you've noticed is actually very similar effects to psychedelics. If you sit there and you focus on just an object in your room, and you focus on it for 10 hours straight, what's going to happen is that your visual field will start to morph and will start to melt, and it'll start to sparkle, and you will literally start to get mild visual hallucination. What is actually happening? The reason that's happening is because your state of consciousness is expanding. We're actually, through meditation, we're tuning that dial up, cranking it up. State of consciousness expands to the point where actually material reality starts to lose its shape. Just a little bit, just a tiny little bit, and your visual field starts to morph a little bit like this as you're meditating. And even in Buddhism, they have sayings like where, monks would meditate, professional lifetime monks would meditate for months and for years, and then they would talk about the dancing Buddha statue. Well, in every Buddhist temple, they have, of course, a statue of the Buddha, but dancing Buddha, why would the Buddha dance? The Buddha's just sitting there. So is it some sort of cute metaphor? What are they really talking about, these Buddhists? Why do they have to be so mystical and schmystical and airy-fairy and new agey? Why can't they just be scientific about it? Well, of course, when they're talking about the dancing Buddha, what they're really talking about is they're sitting there focusing, looking at the Buddha statue for so fucking long that they start to hallucinate how the thing, just like on LSD, it starts to morph like this. The statue actually starts to morph and dance in their visual field. That's your dancing Buddha. It's literal. See? But to reach that state, you have to be a super advanced meditator, which many of you aren't because you're too lazy and too unserious about this work. And that's hard. It's a hard way to go. These days when I sit and meditate just for a little bit, 15 minutes here and there, in my room, I start to get visual hallucinations, very mild, like on a very mild dose on mushrooms or LSD. And to me, that's a good sign. That means I'm meditating properly when that happens. But of course, many people would freak out. They would think, oh, something's wrong with me. No, that's exactly what you want. And the deeper you go into meditation, the more likely that stuff is to happen. If you become a very advanced meditator, you can literally hallucinate, entire objects and beings into existence. Because what's happening is you're tapping into that pure, abstract, creative potential of mind. That's exactly what you want. Of course, it can be kind of freaky, but a psychedelic is that times 1,000. See? So again, the point is not to achieve some blissful state, or to see some cool colors, or to travel to some new dimension. You can do all those things. That's nice. That's fun. The point is the lessons, the insights you get, and the meta understanding of how this entire process works. Because as you're exploring all these different domains, what you're really learning is you're learning about your own mind, how the mind of God is generating reality, and why it's generating it. If your mind is impure, yeah, you're going to see some terrible stuff. Why? Because you're literally imagining it into existence. So the trick with psychedelics is that they're a very powerful tool. But don't get me wrong, I am not saying that they should be your only tool and that you shouldn't do anything else. I have shared with you throughout previous episodes, and I will in the future, dozens, perhaps even 100 different techniques for how to do spiritual work, how to work on yourself, meditation, self-inquiry, Kriya Yoga, shamanic breathing, visualization exercises, contemplation techniques, and many, many others. So many that I can't even recall them all right now. Those are all important techniques. And you're not going to be able to use only psychedelics to master yourself and to master your life and to get to where you really want to get to. So don't fall into that naive mistake, that trap. Rather, psychedelics are a very powerful catalyst, very powerful tool for exploring consciousness and reality. They can significantly speed up your awakening process. They can clear up a lot of confusion. They can help you to face fear of death, which is one of the biggest obstacles for awakening for people. They can get you to understand and have glimpses of awakening. They can get you to do shadow work on trauma and stuff that's holding you back. They can show you your life purpose. They can give you wisdom and guidance about what to do in your life, which decisions to make for major life decisions. They can help you to be creative with your art or your business. They can help you to deal with relationship problems. They can help you to sort out your own sexuality, integrate the masculine and the feminine inside of you. They can show you God. They can show you love. They can show you truth. But really, you're only going to get what you give. You're only going to get from psychedelics what you put into it. It all depends on the seriousness of your commitment, your curiosity, your open-mindedness, and how much you want to grow up. One of the other things psychedelics will do is psychedelics will skyrocket your growth in terms of spiral dynamics. If you haven't checked out my Spiral Dynamics multi-part series, go check it out. It talks about the development of human beings, various stages. Usually, with active work, it can take about 5 years for a person to grow from one spiral stage to the next. So if you're at blue, it'll take you maybe 5 years of active self-improvement work to grow to orange. And then it'll take another 5 years to grow from orange to green, and another 5 from green to yellow. And that's with active, deliberate work, assuming that you're open-minded, you're completely aware of the model and everything, and you're working every day towards it. If you're not doing that, then it might take you 20, 30 years to grow one level. With psychedelics, with consistent use of psychedelics, you can speed that up. You can probably grow a couple of levels. One level every couple of years. They will skyrocket you to the highest levels. So that's one of the other advantages that they have. If you're a scientist, psychedelics will totally transform how you think of and do science. Which actually brings me to a nice analogy that I wanted to present here, a little story. Because I find that scientifically minded people are some of the densest. Some of the densest mind. They're so smart that they're stupid. And that they forget the true nature of science. So here's my story. Galileo Galilei, in the 1600s, he built his own telescope. Now, he wasn't the first human to invent the telescope. Somebody else invented it, but he caught on to the design very early on, and he was one of the first people in Europe to build his own private little telescope. It was just a little thing, nothing major. But this telescope was such a radical technology that he turned it up towards the stars, and he started looking at the moon in greater detail than anyone has ever looked at it. And he looked at Venus and neighboring planets like Jupiter and the moons of Jupiter. He was actually able to look at the moons of Jupiter, count them, and describe them in some minor detail. And then he, of course, started reporting these discoveries. But as he was reporting them, of course, the Spanish Inquisition and all of Europe, basically, which was very Catholic at the time, this was, I think, even pre-Protestant Reformation, so it was all Catholics. Catholicism had a hegemony and a monopoly on the entire thought structure of Europe. And you have to really appreciate the significance of this. At that time, Christianity and science, the study of reality, they were intertwined. There was no such thing as scientists in some laboratory over there, and then theologians and the Pope over here, and then there was a brick wall between the two. No. Universities, the first universities that were probably getting established around that time, they were all theological, based in theology, based in Christianity. So all of the main scientists of that time, and there were scientists, but most of them were actually religious folk, priests and theologians and so forth. And they were interested in studying reality, but of course, only within the paradigm of Christianity. So when Galileo presented his findings of these moons and planets and so forth to the higher ups, what did they do? Did they embrace him and they say, "Oh wow, you created a telescope? Wow, that's an amazing tool. Let me use this thing and validate your discoveries"? No. They demonized him. They looked at his results and they said, "What sorcery is this? Planets, you're counting moons and planets that shouldn't even exist up there. Who are you to contradict God? It says here in our Bible that there can't be those moons out there. There's only X number of planets, X number of moons, one moon and no more, and yada, yada, yada." And then when Galileo told them, and remember, these were scientists. See, this is the mistake that modern scientists make when they think about this example. Of course, modern scientists understand this example, but what modern scientists and atheists and skeptics and rationalists misunderstand is that they use this example as an example of religious dogma suppressing science. No. This is an example of science being locked in a paradigm and being unable to understand new forms of science. This is not an example of religion. This is an example of science. So the scientists of the time, who just happened to be religious, when they saw the results, they rejected the results. And when Galileo told them, "Hey, look, I'm not making this stuff up. This is not like some belief system of mine. I used a telescope to look and to see. I saw it with my own eyes. Look, come guys, look at the telescope. You can see it for yourself too. You don't need to believe me. I'm not trying to create some sort of alternative dogma to Christianity here. I'm just reporting facts that I observed." So what did those scientists do? Did they say, "Oh, okay, let me look in the telescope"? No, of course not. They said, "What devil's instrument is that? Why should we trust this instrument of the devil to report accurate observations?" And they didn't even bother to look through the telescope. That's a textbook example of closed-mindedness and paradigm lock. You are so locked into a paradigm and you are so closed-minded that you refuse to even open yourself up to a new modality of looking at reality that might disprove your paradigm. That is the very definition of paradigm lock. And if you don't know what paradigm lock is, I have a whole episode. I believe it's called Understanding How Paradigms Work. Go search for that. You'll find it on YouTube. Very important episode for what we're talking about here. So, so these folks were locked into this paradigm so much that they refused to even look through a telescope because their paradigm didn't recognize the validity of a telescope. Well, guess what's happening today with psychedelics? Today, psychedelics are that telescope. And today's scientists are those theologians of the past who denied to Galileo his very clear discoveries. Why? Because they were afraid to look into that telescope for themselves. Why? Because their paradigm was so limited that it didn't allow them to look through that telescope. That's exactly what's happening today with modern science. As soon as modern science begins to recognize psychedelics as a valid tool for the exploration of reality, everything in science will change. It will be a game changer bigger than Galileo, bigger than Newton, and bigger than Einstein. There are a small pocket handful of scientists who are on the cutting edge exploring psychedelics right now, and they will make groundbreaking discoveries. The problem, though, is that they will be demonized and stigmatized, and that most of these scientists who are doing this research, if they're in a university, they have to do it underground. They can't tell their students or their colleagues especially that they do psychedelics. Because as soon as they say that I do psychedelics to advance my science and that my science is more accurate because I do psychedelics than your science without psychedelics, as soon as you say that, you're a heretic. That's when the academic inquisition comes for you. That's when you lose your job. That's when you stop being taken seriously. Exactly. Because science is a cultural phenomenon. Science is not merely about gathering data. Science involves meta-scientific issues that are metaphysical and epistemological, which involve questions of method. The question of which methods reveal the truth. This is an open question. You don't know which methods are legitimate or illegitimate until you try them. And with psychedelics, with the psychedelic method, it's not enough to do it once or twice or even 5 times. Because what you're looking at is such a gigantic and profound territory that it would be equivalent to, let's say I was one of these deniers of Galileo, and finally he convinced me to try the telescope. He said, here, just, Leo, try the telescope, just look in it. If you don't see anything that confirms what I'm saying, then you can throw it away and you can continue to prosecute me or persecute me. But just look in it at least once. So I say, okay, fine. Give me your damn telescope. I'll look through this devil's glass once. So I take it, I look through it. I look where do I look? I look at the wall. I don't see anything and I throw it away. And I say, see, nothing. You were full of shit, Galileo. You're an idiot. See, this is not real science. It doesn't work this way. To truly explore and investigate something, you have to be willing to work at it. It's not easy to understand a new thing. Like if somebody like Newton invented calculus, try to imagine the first people who tried to learn calculus from Newton. That was difficult. There was no frame of reference. There was no authority that told you that calculus was true. You had to actually work through it, and maybe it was wrong. You didn't know. You had to actually work through it and check it. That could have taken you years to do. Likewise, with Galileo's telescope, you had to look at the stars carefully. You had to wait till it's the right time of day or night when there's no clouds, no rain, no obstructions. You got to find the right places in the sky to look. You got to look at them carefully with an open mind. Only then can you see what Galileo saw. So it's not a matter of just being some bumbling fool who looks through a glass and boom, the truth is revealed. It's not that simple. Likewise, it's not so simple with the psychedelic where you're some idiot at a friend's house, some sort of party where people are drunk and you pop some mushrooms and you think that, okay, well, Leo told me this will reveal the truth. I take some mushrooms while I'm drunk and I'm smoking weed and I'm shitting with my friends, talking shit. Loud music is playing. You're not going to get anything out of that. But if you carefully, methodically work through it, multiple trips, multiple substances, really introspect, contemplate, have the right intention, be mature, be serious about it. Start with slow doses, low doses, ramp yourself up to medium doses, then to high doses. If you explore it in that fashion, then it's a totally different ballgame. Then now you're into real science. Now you're into the real work. And so that is what's required. All right, I'm going to wrap this up here. This episode was designed for future psychonauts. I see a lot of people doing psychedelics in irresponsible ways. That makes me disappointed because of the power of these tools. It would be sort of like if Galileo had telescopes and he crafted 5 new telescopes to give to people, to scientists, and they took these telescopes and they used them to sexually pleasure themselves. That would be the equivalent of how many people use psychedelics. So don't do that. This is a delicate scientific instrument that you want to use in a precise and methodical manner to grow yourself and to understand reality in profound ways. So treat it with respect. I don't recommend people under 21 years old toy around with psychedelics because you're just too immature at that age, I feel. It really takes maturity. These substances require respect and care. You got to be careful with your protocol, all of those things I've talked about in the past. There are risks involved, of course. You know, when you're looking through a telescope, you might look at the sun. If you look at the sun through a telescope, you'll burn your eyes out. There's risks with exploration. You got to be careful. If you're working in a laboratory as a chemist and you're doing some chemistry experiments, there's a risk that you'll mix 2 chemicals and it's going to explode in some sort of toxic cloud into your face. You know, early pioneers in science who did research into radioactivity, they died from radiation poisoning. Yeah, science can be dangerous. Exploration can be dangerous. Luckily, most psychedelics are not that dangerous. They're not going to destroy your brain. That's one of the best excuses. It seems like the more intelligent a person is, the more of an intellectual they are, the more of an excuse they make against psychedelics by telling me that, oh, Leo, but if I try those psychedelics, it's going to destroy my brain. And then I won't be able to be the, brilliant intellectual that I am. That's like saying that looking through a telescope will burn your eyes out by looking at the moon or looking at the stars. It's just excuses. It's just excuses born of ignorance. The mind is looking for justifications of its paradigm because it doesn't want to challenge its own paradigm. See? So yeah, I recommend you be very careful, be very responsible if you choose to venture into psychedelics. By no means am I pressuring you to. I'm not saying you have to. I'm putting this out there because I feel like somebody will go on the internet, go on YouTube, type in something like, how do psychedelics work? What do psychedelics mean? And they'll stumble upon this talk. And for at least some of you, this will transform your entire life. If you really take to heart what I said here, contemplate it all for yourself, don't believe any of it, verify it for yourself, go on this journey. Man, the sky is the limit. The rewards are unspeakable from doing this work. And of course, it's not just the psychedelics, it's even more importantly, it's the contemplation behind it. It's the intent to want to understand reality and consciousness, which is what my entire channel, Actualized.org, is about. So now we're wrapping up. This is the end. And here I got to pitch my channel. So this is my website, Actualized.org right here. Go click there. You can find my blog. You can find the course. You can find the Life Purpose course. You can find the forum where you can talk about this stuff. People post great trip reports on our forum all the time. Some really inspiring ones. Go check those out. Check out my book list. A lot of great books that will help you in your journey here. And you could also, if you like this content, you can support me on Patreon at patreon.com/actualized. Your donations and so forth support my research. I do a lot of research into this. I don't just read books. All of the stuff in this episode has come from direct experience, massive breakthroughs, nearly 100 trips, dozens of breakthrough trips racking my mind over this stuff for years, experimenting with substances that no man has even ingested before. Like, this is a lot of work goes into this. Money, too. So I do appreciate your support via Patreon. And yeah, the final thing I'll say is that everything that I talk about in my videos is designed to create a foundation for existential understanding of reality. What we're doing here is we're inquiring into the nature of life, death, society, consciousness, reality, science, government, psychology, how our emotions work, how to be happy in life, how to be successful, how to be healthy, all of that. It's a very holistic approach. You're not likely to find a more holistic, big picture understanding channel on all of YouTube. I dare you to find one that goes into this level of depth. But for you to be able to receive what is being offered here via these videos, via these conversations, I have one very difficult prerequisite of you, and that is radical open-mindedness. Radical open-mindedness. You need to be absolutely open-minded. You need to be so open-minded that it will destroy your whole life, and you are still going to be open-minded. Go check out an older episode of mine called Radical Open-Mindedness, where I talk about that. But that is the number one obstacle that holds people back from going as deep as I can take you. Your mind is just not open enough. You're too judgmental. You're too ideological. You're too attached to your beliefs. You're too arrogant. You think you know how reality is and how it works. And you might say here, well, Leo, but you act so arrogant yourself, so you're a hypocrite. You don't understand. Sometimes, yeah, I act out. I can act a little arrogant sometimes. But you have to understand that this is sort of just drama for fun, for entertainment, for you guys, because this is a show. This is a show. This is a TV show, right? But when I'm actually doing this work, I am the most radically open-minded, one of the most radical open-minded people probably on this whole fucking planet. And I am deeply epistemically humble, which means that despite all of the arrogant things that I might say at times, on the inside, I'm always questioning myself. Always. Always. I'm always looking for ways I could be deceiving myself. Always. I'm always looking for self-biases. Always. And it's my having done that for some 20 years, since I was a teenager, since high school, I've been doing this. And really, like, this is my religion. Open-mindedness is my religion. And questioning myself and my self-biases, this is my religion. I've done it so much that it's taken me to levels of understanding of reality which are unspeakable and uncommunicable. And that's not because I can't speak it, but because nobody can understand it whose mind is not as open as mine has been. See, and I'm not saying this to brag or to put myself on a pedestal or anything. You're capable of being open-minded. You just don't understand how important it is. You take it for granted. You think this open-mindedness stuff is just some sort of, cute talk or whatever, but I'm dead serious about this. One of the biggest things that's keeping you from awakening and understanding reality is simply your mind is not open enough. And that's one of the biggest things that will hold you back with psychedelics. Your mind is not open enough. Infinite open-mindedness is what you need. And that's what I ask of you if you're going to be really following along with me. And really, I'm not interested at this point in my career to be appealing to the masses and to be trying to convince every fool out there clicking through one of my videos randomly of the things that I talk about, because the things that I talk about are way beyond conventional human comprehension. You have to be serious about this work to be able to understand the things that I want to teach. And I'm passionate about teaching deep topics, which is why my videos are so damn long. So that requires a certain commitment from you. If you're going to be following with me, you got to be serious. Find the reasons that you need to find to get serious about this work. This is life and death here. There is no more powerful work in the universe that you can do than this work that we're doing, to understand the very core of reality and the core of who you are and why you're here. And there are definitive answers to these questions. This is not theory and armchair philosophy the way they do in universities. This work, if you follow along with me and you carefully do the work and you're very open-minded and you use some of these techniques and tools that I teach about, you will have a level of understanding of reality that is deeper than any academic, any scientist. I don't care how reputable they are. Any intellectual. That's what's possible here. But not only that, you won't just have dry knowledge like some Nobel laureate. It's going to deeply touch your heart. It's going to deeply transform your whole life, your whole mind, everything. It's going to touch all of your relationships. It's going to touch your career. It's going to touch how you speak, how you emote, how you feel, your health. Everything will be touched by this, and in a positive way if you do it correctly. But also you have to be very careful because there's a lot of potential for self-deception, and there are many traps along the way. So what I require of my audience is maturity, seriousness, curiosity, open-mindedness, fearlessness, a desire to explore, willingness to do hard work, and not just to sit there on your ass watching videos or listening to some podcasts, but doing work, meditation, retreats, maybe psychedelics, maybe some breathing techniques, maybe some visualization techniques, whatever. I'm reaching levels of understanding of reality which are going to go over most people's heads. 99% of people, even those who watch my content. And I will outgrow you if you don't grow along with me. I've already outgrown probably a majority of my audience from where I started. A lot of people these days comment under my newest content saying that I'm crazy, that I've lost my mind, that I've gone off the deep end, that I'm a demon, that I'm a devil, whatever. That they want me to go back to teaching old material, that this material isn't practical anymore. But I told you early on that the whole point of this work is that we're growing. And if I'm doing this work and I'm massively growing and you're not doing the work and you're not growing, that means I'm going to leave you in the dust. It's not to brag. It means that I'm going to be speaking from a different reality than you. I'm going to be inhabiting a different reality than you. And I'm going to be telling you about things that are going to seem crazy to you, but that's because you're in an old reality. You haven't been doing the work. You've been slacking off. You're just sitting around watching videos, digging around online. So of course you're not going to. And then the only recourse you're going to have is to call me a devil or to call me insane or whatever. Yeah, because either you're going to come along on this journey with me, or you're going to deny that this journey exists, because you can't admit that this journey exists and all these possibilities that I talk about exist, and then at the same time just sit back and do nothing. See, your soul is not going to tolerate that. Your soul is either going to go on this journey and actually actualize some of this stuff and validate it for yourself, or you're going to become a troll. And you're going to say, oh, Leo's just full of himself. He's just a bullshitter. He's just a scam artist. He's just one of these fake gurus. Like always, he's just starting a cult. Yeah, those are the excuses you will make when you're not doing the work. But those of you who do the work, I receive messages from you periodically, glowing messages about how your life has been transformed and your eyes have been opened to new possibilities. And that's what I live for. That's the greatest reward for the work that I do. It's not the money. It's the impact that I know that I can have on a few of you. So I hope that you are one of those few, one out of the millions. I hope you that I'm talking to right now, that you will hear these words, that you will arise from your slumber, roll up your sleeves, get to work, and then one day you will experience some of the wacky stuff that I talk about, and you'll discover how amazing it is. And then you'll also understand why this stuff is so hidden from the majority of mankind, because they're not open-minded enough and they're not willing to do the work. But we also have a lot more foundational topics to discuss, so stick with me for the future.